Today we're diving into the Imperial Armor Compendium to review the 40k rules of one of the god machines of the Adeptus Titanicus. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd just do a bit of a fun datasheet review of one of the biggest and most points intensive models in the entirety of Warhammer 40k. As I'm sure a lot of people will be aware, the Warhound Titan is the smallest of the Titans of Warhammer 40k, a fast-moving and agile Titan designed for scouting and harassing the enemy. Of course, even at this level, it still towers over Imperial Knights and carries enough firepower to level city blocks. Being a Forge World model, of course, it does come with a price tag reflective of this, clocking in at well over £400 or over $650 US. I do kind of wonder how many of these they sell these days when 3D printing is on the rise, and there's plenty of people who have designed some very similar sculpts to them. In any case though, it's certainly an awesome centerpiece model for 40k, so let's take a look at what it can do in game. So the rules for the Warhound Titan can be found in that Forge World Imperial Armor Compendium, and it clocks in at a massive 2,000 points for a single Lord of War choice. I do find it quite funny that you can basically field an entire 2,000 point army just concentrated in one enormous model. I'm afraid the single one Warhound army list just isn't going to do too well at competitive events right now. So in general, these are the sort of models that will get brought along when you're playing absolutely enormous games of 40k, perhaps with multiple super heavies and enormous models on both sides. For your 2,000 points, you do of course get a pretty intimidating stat line, a huge 20-inch movement to go with its scout roll, weapon skill 4+, ballistic skill 3+, strength and toughness 8, 4 attacks, and a massive 50 wounds at a 2+ armor save. It's further protected by a couple of void shields, which have an interesting kind of mechanic. They give it a 5+ invul save while they're still around, and for the first damage that it takes, the first 3 wounds will be caught on the void shield, then it will collapse, then the next 3 wounds will be caught on the next void shield. It means that any truly enormously high damage weapons don't really want to be shooting it while the void shields are still active, as all they'll do is collapse a void shield, and then all the excess damage will be lost. I do quite like the new rules on void shields, and they reflect how they're supposed to work in the lore. On the downside though, despite being really quite a tough and impressive model, it does have a slightly painful degrading profile. It only needs to take 13 wounds down to 37 wounds before its ballistic skill drops to a 4+, which really isn't what you want in such an enormous threat. After that though, at least its ballistic skill doesn't degrade again until it gets down to only 12 wounds left. The Warhound Titan's armed with 2 armed weapons and then its Warhound feet, and we'll go over the damage output and comparison of them in just a second. Finally, it does have a few special rules, along with one of the most apocalyptic explosions that you can get for 2,000 points. If it gets destroyed and you roll a 6, its reactor goes into meltdown, and every unit within 3d6 inches suffers 2d6 mortal wounds. If this thing does get shot down and if it's in the centre of your army, then quite a large chunk of the rest of your army is going to get blown to smithereens. Maybe that's just a little bit on the scary side, now you can't re-roll the explodes result with a command re-roll. Otherwise, it's got flank speed, allowing it to add an extra 12 inches to its movement if it goes into advanced mode, which I think typically you're not going to want to do, as of course that'll mean not firing with its massive guns, and 20-inch movement is quite a lot anyway. Finally, it does have a fairly generic super heavy rule called Battle Titan, allowing it to move over anything that isn't monsters or vehicles, so it's not just going to get caught up behind a screen of infantry all that easily. Finally, for keywords, they do have the Titan Legion keyword. Unfortunately, there's no sort of chapter tactics that you can get for this yet. Kind of a shame that they didn't include just some basic ones within the Imperial Armor Compendium. It's not really like they're supposed to be massively competitive or balanced models anyway. Overall, the Warhound Titan is an enormous, threatening and really quite tough model. Not really in the realm of competitive 40k play due to its really high points value, and maybe just a tiny bit limited, largely being only able to engage a couple of units per turn due to having just 2 big guns. Talking of those big guns though, let's take a look at what those enormous weapons can do. It can take 4 different weapons, the Inferno Gun, Plasma Blast Gun, Turbo Laser Destructor, or Vulcan Mega Bolter. I've calculated a few rough damage outputs for the weapons, and you can see them here. This is assuming that you take 2 weapons of the same type, though of course you can mix and match. First up we have the enormous flamers of the Inferno Gun, 24-inch range, getting a huge heavy 4d6 auto hits each, at strength 7, AP-3 and flat damage 3. The range really is quite short, but the Warhound Titan's really fast, and because it auto hits, it doesn't really care if the Warhound degrades at all, so it'll be firing it to full effect every single turn. On average, it's just the flat out best choice against infantry, 16 dead intercessors, a pretty crazy 35 wounds on average to a toughness 7 vehicle with both flamers, and still a big 19 wounds to a toughness 8 vehicle with a 2+ save if it happens to be engaging other god machines. In general, the limited target selection could be a bit annoying. It's maybe the best choice to go for if you want it to be engaging things in the midfield, rather than trying to duel and destroy its rivals sat at the back of the army. Next up we have the Warhound Plasma Blast Gun, a 72-inch range with a big heavy 2d6 shots each, strength 10, AP-4 and damage 5 if you overcharge. Though being an exceptionally big plasma weapon, you do take 2 mortal wounds on each hit roll of a 1. I guess if it doesn't matter too much and you're fairly confident of just wiping out whatever you fire it at, you could just not bother overcharging, going down to strength 9 and damage 4. I think maybe the Plasma Blast Gun is the other one of the better ones. It averages 8 dead intercessors, 31 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle, which isn't too bad at that long range, or significantly more against enemy titans and things, 26 wounds to one of its rivals at toughness 8 and a 2+ save. Next up we have the Turbo Laser Destructor, which is 72-inch range, heavy 2d3 shots, and a pretty crazy strength 16, AP-4 and damage d6+3. It's not quite as good against Space Marines, and actually doesn't outcompete the Plasma Blast Gun against either the toughness 7 vehicles or the toughness 8 ones. I guess it is the slightly safer option, I suppose. You're not going to be suffering mortal wounds on the roll of a 1, so it might be the slightly superior option if you're sure that you're going to be engaging heavies and not having to shoot at any infantry. Finally, last and quite possibly least, we have the Vulcan Mega Bolter. Quite a nice generalist anti-infantry profile, 48-inch range, heavy 20 shots, strength 6, AP-2 and damage 2. It does pay for the increased range and damage output though, compared with the Flamers. You're only getting 11 dead intercessors, 12 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle, or only 9 wounds to an enemy super heavy. Overall, even though the bolters look really quite cool, I would typically want to take the Inferno gun instead. It's pretty crazy how well those Flamers can do just as good against toughness 7 vehicles as they can against troops. Finally, the Titan feat are just a little bit underwhelming in my opinion. You only get 8 attacks hitting on 4s, so 3 dead intercessors or 7 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle. It's maybe just a tiny bit disappointing that Warhound Titan feat don't really seem to be significantly stronger than ones from standard Imperial Knights, ones that could come at a quarter of the cost. Might have been fun to have something like a big flat damage 6, because I feel like if you get stepped on by this thing, you're really going to feel it. Overall though, I think my favourite 2 choices are the Inferno gun and the Plasma Blast gun. Both of them do some really solid work, both to heavies and to infantry alike. There are a couple of buffs and synergies that you can use with Titans, though really not all that many. Most of the new codexes do tend to be fairly restrictive on what sort of buffs that can be handed out across the whole Imperium, and maybe 2 of the most relevant ones are Rabute Guilliman, who can give you reroll 1s to hit and +1 to charge, and Belisarius Core, who can repair any Imperium vehicle for d3 wounds per turn. Strangely enough, when you start getting into 2000 point models, Guilliman isn't really all that bad a value just simply as a buffing character, and of course can hand out an entire ton of hurt in melee as well, if the enemy does try and get too close and tries to take out your fancy Forge World machine. I guess it'd be quite good to reroll 1s with the Plasma Blast guns. There may well be more examples of units or characters that can buff Titans. Please let me know if you can think of any down in the comments below. Otherwise, you could think about things to debuff enemy units, things that the Titan might be targeting. A couple of units throughout the Imperium can do some pretty significant things. For example, Admech Metallica Vanguard could get an aura of -1 toughness if they use a stratagem, and that could make enemies easier to kill with the Titan's guns. Or maybe more significantly, a slightly suicidal librarian using Null Zone, riding right up to an enemy heavy, might make it significantly easier for this thing to gun down Mortarion or something. Otherwise, the Titans don't really have any specific stratagems of their own, though command rerolls will have pretty high value on these, maybe things like rerolling the number of shots for the Plasma Blast guns or those Inferno guns. If you get a 1, I think that will be quite good return on investment. Finally, if I were to use a Warhound in-game, I think I'd be wanting to use him in a big game for fun, as I'm afraid for any sort of competitive games, he's just really not all the most efficient use of 2000 points. Those numbers might sound pretty scary, but compared with having an entire army worth of firepower, durability, and units to run around, I'm afraid he's just not really on the same sort of level. I'd personally take either the Flamers or the Plasma. The Flamers do seem okay when combined with his very good movement, and I think that the main thing that you'd want to be doing with him is making sure that he absolutely has good line of sight and movement lanes on turn 1. If you're piling 2000 points into just one model, it will be very disappointing not to get him to shoot for an entire turn. When firing him, I'd certainly think about firing him early in the shooting phase, and point him at some of the hardest targets that your enemy has, just in case those massive swingy guns do deliver a crazy amount of damage. Overall though, he does look like quite a fun unit to use. Big models like this can be quite good for really big games, where you can get quite a lot of points on the table, without having to deal with hundreds of fiddly infantry models, or even just 10 tanks or so. Certainly adds a bit of ease of play if you're trying to make any sort of massive 40k spectacle. So let me know what you think of the Warhound Titan then, any other fun ways that you could put more buffs on him, and if you've had any experience playing with or against Titans in 9th. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.